To understand what happens spiritually when a narcissist loses an empath, we have to begin with something fundamental that is often overlooked in psychological discussions of these relationships. We're not just talking about losing a person or even losing narcissistic supply. We're talking about the loss of the narcissist's only real connection to the divine, to the transcendent, to the spiritual dimension of human existence. Let me explain what I mean, because this touches something essential about how the narcissist actually experiences spiritual reality. By the very nature of their pathology, the narcissist is cut off from direct spiritual experience. Their entire psychological structure is built around avoiding vulnerability, preserving grandiosity, and resisting authentic feeling. Yet, true spiritual experience requires connection to something greater than the ego, moments of transcendence, the felt presence of love as a universal force. All of this demands exactly what the narcissist cannot permit: the surrender of the defended self, openness to transformation by something beyond their control, and the willingness to feel awe and smallness before the mystery of existence. As a result, the narcissist lives in a kind of spiritual desert. They are disconnected from the numinous, from the sacred, from those moments of grace, beauty, and meaning that make life feel spiritually rich. They may perform a religious or spiritual identity, attending services, speaking spiritual language, even holding positions of spiritual authority, but there is no genuine inner experience beneath the performance. It becomes part of the grandiose image, another stage for displaying superiority. Then the empath enters their life, bringing something the narcissist cannot create on their own: a living, embodied connection to spiritual depth. The empath has the capacity for genuine love, not as a transaction or performance, but as a state of being, an open heart that connects them to something greater than themselves. They can witness beauty and be moved by it. They can feel compassion and allow it to transform them. They can access transcendence through art, nature, relationships, and even suffering. They are spiritually alive in a way the narcissist simply is not. And in the empath's presence, the narcissist experiences these spiritual dimensions. Secondhand, they observe love through the empath's ability to give it. They touch transcendence through the empath's access to it. They feel something resembling spiritual depth simply by being near someone who truly embodies it. In this sense, the empath becomes the narcissist's intermediary to the divine, not in a grand religious way, but in the simple and profound sense that the empath offers access to spiritual experiences the narcissist cannot reach alone. Imagine how this appears in everyday life. The empath brings the narcissist to a beautiful natural setting and feels genuine wonder and reverence for the sacredness of the moment. The narcissist doesn't feel it directly. Their defenses block it. But by watching the empath's authentic reaction, they can approximate the experience. They might say, yes, this is beautiful, and almost believe it, because the empathist's sincerity creates a kind of emotional contact high. Or the empath loves the narcissist with unconditional acceptance, the ability to see someone fully and still love them. The narcissist cannot create this kind of love and cannot fully receive it without their defenses. Yet they can experience it indirectly through the empath's presence. In those moments, they brush against something that feels like grace, like the spiritual love described in religious traditions. Or the empath finds meaning in suffering, turning pain into growth, and discovering beauty within brokenness. The narcissist, who usually experiences suffering only as an injury to defend against, can witness through the empath that pain can be held in a different way, one that is spiritually generative rather than purely destructive. The empath continually shows them what it means to be spiritually alive, what it looks like to access dimensions of human experience that the narcissist pathology has cut them off from. And through this witnessing, through this closeness, the narcissist develops a kind of borrowed spiritual life. They are not doing the inner work that creates genuine spiritual depth, but they remain close enough to someone who has done that work to experience its fruits indirectly. This is why the relationship with the empath often feels different to the narcissist than other relationships. It isn't only that the empath provides stronger or more reliable supply, though that is part of it. It is that the empath offers access to something the narcissist has no other way of reaching. The spiritual richness of true human depth, authentic love, and transcendent meaning. But here's the devastating spiritual consequence. When the empath leaves, that portal closes. Suddenly and completely, the narcissist's only connection to divine experience is cut off. They are returned to the spiritual desert they have always inhabited, you know, but now with the awareness of what they have lost. They know what it felt like to be near someone who could access spiritual depth, who could generate genuine love, who could transform ordinary moments into something sacred through the quality of their presence and attention. They have tasted that closeness to the divine, even if it was always borrowed and secondhand, and now it is gone. The empath has taken that spiritual vitality with them, and the narcissist is left in an isolation that is not only emotional or psychological, but deeply spiritual. They are cut off from the very dimensions of human experience that give life meaning, that connect us to something greater than our small defended selves. This loss operates on a different level than anything discussed purely in psychological terms. It is not just loneliness or the absence of supply. It is a profound spiritual isolation, the awareness that there are depths of love, meaning, and beauty that you cannot access on your own and no longer reach through another. When your only bridge was another person's soul, their departure does more than leave you alone. It leaves you exiled from the divine itself. So, to understand what happens spiritually, when the narcissist loses the empath, we must speak about light and shadow, not as abstract metaphors, but, but as real forces within the spiritual dynamics of human relationships. The empath carries a particular quality of light. This is more than simple warmth or kindness, though it includes those qualities. It is a spiritual radiance that comes from the ability to remain open-hearted despite pain, to choose love despite fear, to stay connected to something transcendent even in darkness. The empath's presence seems to illuminate the spaces they occupy. People feel it, and the narcissist feels it most of all. Here is the crucial point. In the empath's presence, the narcissist could bask in that light without creating any of their own. They could exist close to spiritual depth, genuine love, and transcendent meaning without doing the inner work required to access those states themselves. The empath's light was bright and steady enough to create the illusion that the narcissist, too, was capable of living in that luminous space. Consider what this meant in the narcissist's everyday experience. In the empath's presence, they could encounter moments of beauty, connection, even something resembling grace. The empath's sense of wonder made ordinary moments feel meaningful. Their emotional depth created the impression of shared spiritual experience. Their forgiveness and compassion allowed the narcissist to maintain the fantasy that they too were fundamentally good, fundamentally capable of love. The empath's light was so strong that it pushed the narcissist's shadow behind them, making it easier to ignore. As long as the empath remained, radiating that spiritual brightness, the narcissist did not have to face the darkness within themselves. They could stand in the empath's glow and mistake reflected light for their own inner radiance. But when the empath leaves, the spiritual consequences become severe. When that sustaining light disappears, when the empath's presence is no longer there to both illuminate and conceal, the narcissist is suddenly confronted with their own shadow in a way they have long avoided, the darkness they have been running from, the spiritual emptiness they have denied, the void where genuine spiritual presence should exist. All of it becomes visible once the empath's light is gone. This is not a slow or gentle realization. It is often felt as a kind of spiritual crisis, a sudden descent into darkness that seems catastrophic. The narcissist has lived in borrowed light for so long that they have either forgotten or never truly known what their own inner landscape looks like. And what they discover in the empath's absence is frightening. There is nothing there, no inner light to sustain them, no spiritual center to return to, only emptiness, shadow, and the accumulated darkness of years, even decades of spiritual avoidance and emotional dishonesty. The contrast is what makes this so unbearable. If the narcissist had never encountered the empath's light, they might remain comfortable in their darkness, unaware that anything else existed. But they have tasted what it feels like to live close to genuine spiritual presence. They have experienced love, depth, meaning, and transcendence. Even if these experiences were borrowed rather than truly their own, and now they are back in the dark, but with the awareness of what light feels like, with a memory of spiritual warmth, with the painful realization of what they have lost and what they never actually possessed within themselves. This creates a particular form of spiritual suffering that is difficult to describe or resolve. The narcissist cannot return to unconscious darkness because they have seen the light. Yet they also cannot access their own inner light because they have not done the work required to develop it. They may have spent years, perhaps a lifetime, constructing defenses against the vulnerability and self-honesty that real spiritual growth demands. So they remain trapped, aware of the light, but unable to create it, conscious of the darkness, yet unwilling to face the shadow work needed to transform it. They know what they lack, but cannot reach it through their own efforts. And the person who once provided access is gone. The empath's departure forces the narcissist to confront their own spiritual emptiness. This confrontation is so painful and so threatening to their entire defensive structure that they usually respond in one of two ways. Either they retreat further into denial, desperately searching for new sources of borrowed light to avoid their inner darkness, or they fall into a form of spiritual despair that resembles depression but is really the soul's protest against its own neglect. Neither response brings healing, because both still avoid the essential spiritual work the narcissist must face, turning toward their shadow, sitting with their darkness, and doing the difficult internal labor of developing their own light from within. The empath's presence once allowed them to avoid this work indefinitely. The empath's absence makes it unavoidable. Yet when faced with this spiritual reckoning, the narcissist almost always chooses continued avoidance over genuine transformation, because transformation would demand everything they have spent their life defending against: vulnerability, honesty, the dismantling of the false self, and the integration of disowned parts. So the darkness the empath's light once concealed does not simply remain, it deepens. It becomes darkness with awareness, emptiness with the memory of fullness, and spiritual poverty with the knowledge of what richness feels like. The narcissist becomes spiritually impoverished in a way they can no longer deny. And that awareness, without the willingness to change, becomes his own form of torment. And when the light that once hid your darkness disappears, you finally see what you have been running from. And seeing alone changes nothing if you still refuse to heal. Yet the spiritual consequences of losing the empath go beyond this confrontation with inner darkness, because something else is happening on a deeper level, something that moves beyond psychology. It is the principle of karmic return, the natural movement toward balance, reciprocity, and consequence. It's important to be clear here, because karma is often misunderstood as a system of cosmic punishment or divine revenge. That is not the point. Karma, in its true sense, is simply the law of cause and effect operating through energy, intention, and action. What you send into the world creates ripples that eventually return to you. Not because the universe is judging you, but because that is how energy naturally flows. The narcissist may have spent years, perhaps their entire life, acting in ways that create harm, manipulating, deceiving, taking without giving, and wounding others in order to protect their fragile sense of self. And all of this creates karmic debt, an energetic imbalance that seeks resolution, consequences that naturally arise from harmful actions. But here is what the empath was doing, often without even realizing it. They were absorbing and softening those consequences. They took the impact of the narcissist's harmful behavior and transformed it through their own capacity for forgiveness, uh, compassion, and unconditional. In many ways, they stood between the narcissist and the natural return of their own destructive energy. And think about how this appeared in everyday life. When the narcissist lied, the empath believed them, sparing them the consequence of lost trust. When the narcissist raged, the empath absorbed the outburst without retaliation, preventing the escalation that anger usually creates. When the narcissist betrayed them, the empath forgave again and again, postponing the abandonment that betrayal often leads to. When the narcissist caused harm, the empath made excuses, protected their reputation, and shielded them from being fully exposed. Gend. The empath was functioning as a kind of karmic shock absorber, taking the force of consequences that would naturally return to the narcissist and transforming them into something softer, something survivable, something the narcissist could continue to ignore. This was not healthy for the empath. We understand that clearly now, but on a spiritual level, it served a function for the narcissist. It allowed them to continue destructive patterns without feeling the full weight of their actions. It delayed the universe's natural movement toward balance. It created a protective barrier around the narcissist, insulating them from the energetic return of their own behavior. Mm. But when the empath leaves, when they finally choose themselves and walk away, that buffer disappears. And what often follows is what could be called karmic acceleration. Suddenly, all those postponed consequences, all that accumulated energetic debt, all the natural returns the empath had been absorbing or deflecting, begin to surface with surprising speed. Minda. This often shows up as a chain reaction of external events in the narcissist's life. Relationships they believed were stable suddenly fall apart. Professional situations that once seemed secure begin to unravel. People who tolerated their behavior for years start setting boundaries or walking away entirely. Secrets they thought were buried come into the light. Lies they believed were safe are exposed. The fragile structure they built starts to collapse, and it collapses quickly. And from the outside, this might appear to be coincidence or simple bad luck. The narcissists themselves will likely frame it that way, seeing themselves as victims of circumstances, other people's failures, or an unfair world. But what is actually happening is that natural consequences are finally being allowed to complete their cycle. The empath's departure often becomes a turning point where the spiritual protection they unknowingly provided is removed, and the narcissist must face the accumulated weight of their own choices. It is not punishment. It is simply the restoration of balance, the universe correcting an imbalance that the empath's presence had been sustaining. This is why the period after losing an empath can feel especially chaotic and destructive for the narcissist. It is not only the loss of one person or one relationship, it is the removal of a spiritual buffer that had been shielding them dot from the natural consequences of their behavior across many areas of life. So, what makes this especially significant is that the narcissist had countless opportunities throughout the relationship to change course, to choose growth over defense, to transform destructive patterns. In this way, the empath offered not only love, but the possibility of redemption. They provided a chance to break harmful cycles within an environment of deep acceptance. And every act of forgiveness was an invitation. You can choose differently, you can heal. There is space for that here. But the narcissist rejected those invitations again and again. They mistook the empath's grace for permission to remain unchanged. They interpreted patience as proof that transformation was unnecessary. They used unconditional love as a license for conditional behavior. And so, when the empath finally leaves, they are not only withdrawing their personal presence, they are also withdrawing the spiritual grace period they had been extending.